In the lab of human interaction, trust is not a choice, it is a chemical reaction. Before a single word leaves your mouth, before you extend your hand, before you even smile, the subject across from you has already run a full threat assessment. The organ responsible? The amygdala, two almond-shaped clusters buried deep in the limbic brain, evolutionarily ancient, pre-verbal, and entirely indifferent to your credentials, your intentions, or your carefully rehearsed introduction. Its job is singular, categorize, immediately, friend, foe, or irrelevant. Research from Princeton University, published in the journal Psychological Science, determined that subjects form stable first impressions of trustworthiness, competence, and likability in as little as 1/10 of a second. Not 7 seconds. 100 milliseconds. 7 seconds is generous. This is what researchers call the social categorization response. Your amygdala is not evaluating the stranger in front of you. It is pattern matching them against 30,000 years of tribal survival data embedded in your neurobiology. It is asking one primal question. Does this individual increase my survival probability or threaten it? And here is where it becomes clinically fascinating. This assessment is not random. It is not arbitrary. It follows a code, a predictable, replicable, neurochemical sequence that, once understood, can be deliberately activated. That is what this briefing is. Not a list of tips, not a personality makeover. A protocol, built from peer-reviewed research, behavioral studies, and clinical psychology, designed to answer one question with scientific precision. What exactly happens in the brain when one individual instantly likes another? Stay with us, because the data is going to challenge everything you think you know about human connection. The Pratfall Effect and vulnerability. Let us begin with a counterintuitive finding. One that, when it first emerged from the laboratory of social psychologist Elliot Aronson in 1966, was dismissed as an anomaly. It was not an anomaly. Aronson's team presented subjects with audio recordings of two types of individuals. Type A highly competent individual, someone who answered nearly every question correctly, demonstrated expertise, and projected consistent confidence. Type B, the same highly competent individual, but one who, at some point during the recording, committed a minor, embarrassing blunder. They spilled coffee. They stumbled over a word. A small, human moment of imperfection. The question Aronson posed to subjects: which individual do you find more likable? The rational prediction, the logical outcome, would be that the flawless subject scores higher. The data disagreed. Subjects rated type B, the competent individual who blundered, as significantly more likable, more approachable, more trustworthy. Aronson called this phenomenon the Pratfall Effect. Here is the neurological explanation. When a subject presents as perfectly competent, the amygdala, still running its threat assessment, registers something unexpected. Not warmth, not safety, suspicion. Because in the natural world, perfection is rare, and rare things are either dangerous or deceptive. The brain, operating on evolutionary logic, reads flawlessness as a potential mask, a performance, and performances, by definition, conceal something. But imperfection? Imperfection is costly signaling. It is biological honesty. When a subject reveals vulnerability, the brain of the observer releases a small but measurable surge of oxytocin, the neuropeptide associated with trust, bonding, and social affiliation. In simpler terms, your flaws are not liabilities. They are neurochemical trust signals. However, and this is a critical clinical distinction, the Pratfall Effect is not unconditional. Aronson's research also examined subjects who were not highly competent but still committed blunders. Their likability scores did not rise. They fell. The protocol is precise. Vulnerability elevates the already competent. It does not compensate for absence of competence. The sequence matters. Demonstrate capability first, then allow the human crack to show. This is why the most magnetic individuals in any professional or social environment are not the ones performing perfection. They are the ones who have the security to let the performance drop for a moment. The individual who laughs at their own mistake in a high-stakes meeting. The leader who says, "I don't know," without apology. The expert who shares the story of their most significant failure before describing their greatest success. These are not accidents of personality. These are practitioners of the Pratfall protocol. But here's where the data takes a darker turn. Because if vulnerability can be engineered, if it can be deployed strategically, then the question is no longer just scientific. It becomes ethical. And we will return to that question in the final segment of this briefing. For now, understand this. The amygdala is not looking for the most impressive individual in the room. It is looking for the most trustworthy. And trust, neurologically, is built not on strength, but on the willingness to expose weakness. Neural coupling and mirroring. In 2010, neuroscientist Yui Hassan at Princeton University published a finding that fundamentally altered the scientific understanding of human communication. He placed subjects inside fMRI scanners and recorded their neural activity during conversation. Then he did something no researcher had done before at scale. He compared the brain activity of the speaker and the listener in real time. What he found was not parallel activity, not similar patterns. Synchronization. The brain of the listener was not merely processing the words of the speaker. In the regions associated with emotion, prediction, and social understanding, the listener's brain was mirroring the speaker's brain with a measurable time delay. When the coupling was strong, when the two brains were highly synchronized, the listener reported greater understanding, greater trust, and significantly greater liking of the speaker. Hassan called this neural coupling. The informal term in the field is brain-to-brain synchrony. This finding recontextualized decades of prior research on mirror neurons, a class of neurons first documented in the 1990s by neuroscientist Giacomo Rizzolatti at the University of Parma. Mirror neurons, simply stated, are neurons that fire both when a subject performs an action and when the subject observes another performing that same action. They are the neurological basis of empathy, imitation, and social learning. When subject A smiles, the mirror neurons in subject B's brain simulate that smile from the inside. When subject A leans forward with interest, subject B's motor cortex quietly prepares to mirror that posture. This is not conscious. It is not deliberate. It is automatic, precognitive, and it is a foundation of what behavioral researchers call social synchrony, the invisible physiological alignment that occurs between individuals who are genuinely connected. Research published in the Journal of Experimental Social Psychology demonstrated that individuals who were subtly mirrored by a confederate in a conversation rated that individual as significantly more likable, more persuasive, and more trustworthy, without being able to identify why. This is a critical phrase, without being able to identify why, because the process operates entirely below the threshold of conscious awareness. The subject feels rapport. They do not detect the mechanism producing it. So what are the specific behavioral vectors through which synchrony is established? 3 primary channels have been identified in the literature. First, postural mirroring, the gradual, delayed adoption of the other subject's physical positioning. The key word is gradual. Immediate mirroring is detected and reads as mockery. Delayed mirroring, introduced with a lag of 8 to 12 seconds, reads as natural resonance. Second, vocal cadence matching. Research from the University of Michigan demonstrated that subjects who unconsciously aligned their speech rate, pitch range, and pause patterns with a conversation partner reported significantly greater feelings of connection, even in telephone interactions with no visual component whatsoever. Third, respiratory synchrony, perhaps the most powerful and least discussed mechanism. Studies in the domain of interpersonal synchrony have documented that individuals in deep rapport will synchronize their breathing patterns, with one subject's inhalation often triggering the others. This is involuntary and organic connection, but it can be initiated deliberately. The protocol is this. In any high-stakes conversation, do not focus on what you are saying. Focus on matching the rhythm of the person in front of you, their pace, their pauses, their physical stillness or animation. Let your behavior become a delayed, softened echo of theirs. The neuroscience predicts the outcome. Their brain will couple with yours. And once two brains are coupled, once the synchrony is established, the subjective experience of the other individual is not "this person is mirroring me." It is something far more powerful. This person understands me. But the data shows a darker side to this phenomenon. Because if neural coupling can be established deliberately, if synchrony can be manufactured, then charisma is no longer a personality trait. It is a technology, and technologies can be weaponized. We will examine the ethics of that in our final segment. For now, the protocol continues. The halo effect and trait transference. In 1920, psychologist Edward Thorndike published a study that would quietly become one of the most replicated findings in the entire history of social psychology. He asked military officers to rate their subordinates across multiple independent categories: intelligence, physical appearance, leadership ability, personal character, and general value to the service. The expectation was that these ratings would be largely independent of one another. After all, a soldier could be physically impressive but intellectually unremarkable, brave but poorly organized. The data showed something else entirely. The ratings clustered. Consistently, officers who were rated highly on physical appearance were systematically rated higher across every other category, including categories Areta had no direct evidence to assess. Thorndike named this the halo effect. The premise: a single positive trait in a subject does not remain isolated. It radiates. It bleeds into the observer's assessment of every other dimension of that individual's character, including dimensions the observer has never directly witnessed. In the decades since Thorndike's wake, the halo effect has been documented across virtually every domain of human judgment. Physically attractive defendants receive lighter sentences in controlled legal simulations. More attractive individuals are perceived as more intelligent, more ethical, and more competent, even when controlling for actual performance metrics. Research published in the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology confirmed that subjects presented with photographs of physically attractive strangers rated those individuals as more socially skilled, better adjusted, and more professionally successful on the basis of photograph. But here's what makes the halo effect clinically useful rather than merely fascinating. Physical attractiveness is not the only halo-generating variable. It is simply the most visually immediate one. The mechanism, trait transference, operates across multiple categories. Research from the field of implicit personality theory, the study of how humans unconsciously construct mental models of strangers, demonstrates that the following traits, when observed, trigger automatic transference to unrelated positive qualities. Warmth: a subject perceived as genuinely warm, attentive, responsive, oriented toward others, is automatically rated high on competence, intelligence, and reliability, despite these being logically unrelated qualities. Confidence: not arrogance, not aggression, but the quiet, calibrated confidence of an individual who occupies their space without apology. This single trait reliably transfers to perceived expertise, trustworthiness, and leadership capacity. Specificity of praise: research from Columbia University demonstrated that when a subject offers praise to another individual that is highly specific, referencing precise detail rather than a general compliment, the receiver's assessment of the praiser increases dramatically. Specific praise signals genuine attention, and genuine attention signals genuine investment. The halo effect then propagates outward from that investment. The protocol that emerges from this body of research is what behavioral strategists call strategic halo anchoring. Identify the single trait you can most authentically and immediately project in a given interaction. Then invest entirely in that trait during the critical first minutes. Not because it will remain isolated to that trait, because it will not. If warmth is your most authentic immediate offering, lead with warmth. Your competence will be inferred. If expertise is your strongest initial signal, demonstrate it with precision. Your character will be assumed. The brain does not wait for complete data. It extrapolates. It generalizes. It constructs an entire portrait from a single brushstroke. The halo effect is not a cognitive bias to be overcome. It is a social mechanism to be calibrated. And the subjects who understand this do not spend their social energy trying to impress across every dimension simultaneously. They identify their most credible halo, and they let it work. The Ben Franklin Protocol. Benjamin Franklin was not a psychologist, but he documented one of the most powerful and counterintuitive social phenomena in recorded history, 2.5 centuries before the neuroscience existed to explain it. In his autobiography, Franklin described a political rival, a member of the Pennsylvania legislature who opposed him openly and had, in Franklin's words, treated him with considerable hostility. Franklin did not respond with charm. He did not attempt to impress this individual. He did not demonstrate warmth or seek common ground. He asked him for a favor. Specifically, he wrote to this rival requesting the loan of a rare book from his personal library. The rival complied. Franklin returned the book with a note of appreciation. What followed? In Franklin's own account, he ever after manifested a readiness to serve me on all occasions, and we became great friends. Franklin had stumbled, through social intuition rather than scientific method, onto a phenomenon that modern psychology would later formalize as cognitive dissonance-based liking. Here is a mechanism. When subject A does something positive for subject B, the brain of subject A must reconcile its behavior with its existing belief system. If subject A has previously categorized subject B as an adversary, an undeserving individual, then the act of helping subject B creates a psychological inconsistency. The brain does not tolerate inconsistency. It is metabolically expensive. The resolution pathway of least resistance is attitude adjustment. In simpler terms, If I help this person, I must like this person, because I do not help people I dislike. This is a cognitive architecture behind what researchers formerly called the Ben Franklin effect, the empirically validated phenomenon wherein performing a favor for another individual reliably increases the favor doer's positive regard for the recipient. In 1969, John Jeck and David Landy tested this directly. Subject who performed a favor for a researcher, returning money at the researcher's personal request, rated that researcher as significantly more likable than subjects who were not asked to perform a favor. The favor increased their liking, not of themselves, of the recipient of the favor. The implications are significant. The standard model of social dynamics assumes that liking precedes helping, that we do favors for people we already like. The Ben Franklin effect invokes this sequence. Helping can produce liking. The behavior can precede and construct the emotion. But the protocol is more nuanced than simply asking for favors. Research on the Ben Franklin effect has identified several critical variables that determine whether the mechanism activates. The favor must be modest. An outsized request generates resentment, not liking. The cognitive dissonance produced by a large favor is resolved differently, through frustration rather than affection. The favor must feel chosen. When subjects perceive they were coerced or socially pressured into helping, the dissonance resolves as irritation. The favor must feel like an act of voluntary agency. The request must acknowledge the other individual's specific competence. Research from the field of identity-based motivation demonstrates that favors framed as "I'm asking you specifically because of your expertise in this area" trigger a significantly stronger liking response than general requests for assistance. This is why the most socially sophisticated individuals in any environment, the ones who seem to generate inexplicable loyalty and warmth from others, are often also the ones who ask for help most naturally and most strategically. They are not projecting helplessness. They are activating a neuropsychological protocol that turns the act of receiving into a mechanism for bonding. But we have now covered 4 protocols. 4 empirically validated mechanisms for generating trust, rapport, and liking in another human being. And a question has been building since the first minute of this briefing. A question the data demands we address directly. If these protocols work, and the research confirms they do, what exactly separates a use from manipulation? The answer is not as clean as you might want it to be. The ethics of influence. We have been clinical in this briefing, intentionally so. The language of protocols and mechanisms and behavioral triggers serve a purpose beyond stylistic choice. It reflects an honest accounting of what charisma, at its most fundamental level, actually is. It is influence technology. And influence technology, like all technology, is ethically inert in its structure. The ethics live entirely in the application. Let us be precise about what we have described in this briefing. We have described how to deploy vulnerability strategically to generate oxytocin release in a stranger's brain, how to synchronize your neural activity with another subject's through deliberate behavioral mirroring, how to engineer a halo effect by anchoring on your strongest positive trait, how to leverage cognitive dissonance to manufacture liking in a rival's mind. Read in sequence like that. The language reveals attention. Deploy, engineer, leverage, manufacture. This is a clinical problem. The behavioral outputs of authentic connection and manufactured connection are, in many documented cases, indistinguishable to the observer. The neural coupling that occurs when 2 people are genuinely resonant looks the same on an fMRI as neural coupling produced by deliberate mirroring techniques. The oxytocin released by genuine vulnerability is chemically identical to the oxytocin released by performed vulnerability. So where exactly is the line? Social psychologist Robert Cialdini, whose foundational work on influence and persuasion remains a benchmark in the field, has articulated one of the clearest frameworks for this distinction. His position, paraphrased from decades of research, the ethical application of influence aligns what people want with what actually serves them. The unethical application of influence aligns what people want with what serves the influencer at the expense of the influenced. This is not a comfortable framework, because it forces an uncomfortable self-audit. When you deploy the Pratfall protocol, when you strategically reveal a vulnerability to generate trust, what is the intended downstream outcome for the other individual? Are you creating the condition for a genuine relationship? Or are you manufacturing a perception of trustworthiness that will be instrumentalized and discarded? When you practice neural coupling techniques in a conversation, when you deliberately mirror cadence and posture to generate rapport, is a connection you are building one that both parties would endorse if they understood the mechanism? The research here is unambiguous about one thing: consent and transparency fundamentally alter the ethical calculus. Studies in therapeutic contexts, where practitioners explicitly use rapport building and mirroring techniques, demonstrate that informed subjects who understand the tools being used report no reduction in the authenticity of the connection they feel. The knowledge of a mechanism does not dissolve the experience of the outcome. This is significant. It suggests that the ethics of influence are not located in the mechanism itself. They are located in what the mechanism is building toward. A physician uses precise, practiced language to reduce patient anxiety before a procedure. The language is deliberate. The outcome is genuine comfort. No reasonable ethical framework categorizes this as manipulation. A salesperson uses the same precise, practiced language to reduce cognitive resistance before an unnecessary purchase. The language is identical. The outcome serves only one party. Same tool, different ethics. So here's a clinical question this briefing asked you to carry forward. When you apply the protocols described in this briefing, and the data strongly suggests you will, because they work, are you building something real with the trust you generate? Are you offering something of genuine value in exchange for the liking you elicit? Is the connection you are engineering one that, if the other subject could see your full intention, they would still choose? Because here is the deepest finding in the psychology of charisma, the one that the research consistently arrives at, regardless of the mechanism under examination. The most magnetic individuals are not the most skilled performers of connection. They are the individuals for whom the performance and the reality have become indistinguishable, not because they have perfected the mask, because, through practice and intention, they have become what they were initially only performing. The practitioner of vulnerability who initially deployed it strategically and discovered, in the process, that being open actually felt better than being armored. The neurocoupler who learned to genuinely listen while matching cadence, and found that genuine listening produced better information, better relationships, better outcomes for everyone. The ethics of influence are not a wall to stop you from applying these protocols. They are a compass, pointing toward a version of charisma that does not require you to remember which performance you are running, because you are no longer performing. The social calibration protocol. Let us consolidate the findings of this briefing into what behavioral researchers call a social calibration protocol. Not a checklist, not a script, a set of calibrated orientations, backed by the evidence we have reviewed, that, applied with genuine intent, systematically increase the probability of authentic, lasting connection. Calibration point 1. Operate inside your competence, but let the edges show. The Pratfall Effect is not a license of performed incompetence. It is a directive to stop concealing the human texture of your actual experience. The crack in your confidence. The story of the failure before the success. These are not liabilities to be managed. They are oxytocin delivery mechanisms. Allow them. Calibration point 2. Synchronise before you persuade. Before you attempt to communicate anything of substance, before you present, negotiate, pitch, or connect, invest time in behavioral alignment. Match the pace of the room. Match the energy register of the individual. Let the neural coupling establish itself. You are not wasting time. You are building the neurological infrastructure through which everything you say will be received. Calibration point 3. Find your halo. Anchor on it. Trust the transference. You do not need to be exceptional across every dimension of human engagement. You need to identify the single quality you can most authentically and most immediately offer: warmth, expertise, presence, humor, precision, and invest in that quality completely during critical early interactions. The halo effect will do the rest. Let it. Calibration point 4. Ask for something small. Ask for something specific. Ask for it because of them. The Ben Franklin protocol is perhaps the most counterintuitive tool in this briefing, but the data is consistent across 6 decades of replication. If you want to build genuine affection in someone who is neutral or opposed to you, give them the opportunity to help you. Frame the request around their specific expertise or knowledge. Keep it modest, and mean the gratitude. The cognitive dissonance will resolve in your favor, and the connection built will be, paradoxically, more durable than one built on your impressive performance. And calibration point 5, the one that supersedes all others. Apply these protocols in the service of outcomes that both parties would endorse, not as a legal compliance measure, not as a philosophical disclaimer, as a functional strategy, because the research consistently demonstrates that influence applied with genuine alignment to the other party's interests generates more durable connections, more robust social networks, and more sustainable trust than influence applied in extraction mode. Manipulation compounds negatively. Authentic calibration compounds positively. The math, ultimately, favors integrity. Here is what the science of charisma ultimately reveals. Instant likability is not a mystery of personality. It is a set of reproducible neurochemical events, triggered by predictable behavioral inputs that the human brain has been executing for tens of thousands of years. The amygdala's 7-second filter is not a barrier. It is an invitation to speak the biological language of trust, to offer the vulnerability that signals honesty, to synchronize the rhythm that creates resonance, to anchor the halo that generates inference, to ask the favor that produces affection. These are not manipulations. When practiced with intention and integrity, they are the most human things you can do. They are the behavioral vocabulary of connection. And connection, the research makes abundantly clear, is not a social luxury. It is a biological need. You have been briefed. The code is in your hands. What you build with it, that determination belongs entirely to you. The most sophisticated social technology ever developed is not in a device. It is in the deliberate choice to be genuinely present with another human being. The Psych Lab